everyone, it's Jill Foster here for Penny Black, and I am so excited to be sharing with you some very simple step-by-step scenic stamping. And these type of cards are so fun to create. You immediately feel like such an artist, and it is a joy to create these cards. They're very easy to mail. They're one layer, so they're easy to mail. They also make great masculine cards, thinking of you cards, birthday cards, so they are very, very versatile cards. And what makes these so easy and fun to create are these gorgeous stamps. So the first stamp we're going to be working with is the Cling Stamp 40-747 Arbors. And the first step in creating these scenic cards is to paint a simple background that complements the stamp. And so I'm going to show you that here. One other tip I highly recommend when trying these techniques is to work on Bristol smooth cardstock. It will make the blending and stamping very easy. So I have my stamp in my stamp positioning tool, and I'm just using a water-based marker. I'm using the Arteza Twi markers, and I just colored with that onto my paper just to create a light hill in the background. I didn't want to go too dark with my color because I am going to be stamping over the top of this hill in the background. So I'm keeping my paper positioned in my stamp positioning tool and just painting that, and I already have my stamp positioned where I want it, and you could see at the very beginning I did sort of tip that over a little bit so that I could see exactly where those trees would be stamped. Now I took another marker and just colored onto my stamp positioning tool to use it as a palette, just to give this more of an olive look and less of that minty color for the background. You can also do that onto an actual palette or an acrylic block. And I'm going to dry this before I move on to adding my next color for this background. You can do this with watercolors. You could do this with any of your water-based markers. So there really is no limit to what you use for the background. You could also use some masking and some distress inks with sponging to create your background as well. I just like the ease of using the markers and the control that I have, and they blend very beautifully on the Bristol smooth paper. So here I wanted to have a bit of a sunset or a sunrise in the background, and I like the warmth that this adds to the scene and just a little something extra. Now you will find with your markers that some colors will blend easier than others, so you may want to test them out on a scratched piece of paper before painting them right onto your paper or coloring with them right onto your paper. And I'm going to dry this before moving on to my next step. So that was the first step, just painting a background that complements the stamped image. And now I'm ready to move on to step 2. So step 2 is going to be to just stamp the image. And using a stamp positioning tool, you can blend and re-stamp as desired, and you can really reach for whatever inks that you prefer. So here I'm going to, just to get some really good coverage of the trees, I'm going to ink them up with my Memento ink pad. And I'm going to stamp them onto the background, move that magnet out of the way. You notice I didn't ink up the trunks, I just inked up the trees. And this just gives me a light look for placement, where that's going to be. It helps when adding some shading on there. And I'm going to just re-stamp so I can darken up the color. Now I do have all of the exact colors of markers and inks and stamps listed at the very end of the video. And you can see there I like the little bit of that darker color, and the scene is already starting to take shape. Now here I inked that and lightly misted it with water. Again, I'm continuing to use that Memento ink, and now you can really start to see how by misting that you get a watercolor stamped look that works perfectly with the watercolor background, and it unifies that entire scene. Now for the trunks of these trees, I'm using an archival ink. It's a mini ink pad, so it's very easy to get it just onto the trunks of the trees. If there's a little bit that gets onto the leaves, I just dab it off with my finger. And here I'm going to grab one of those Twi markers and color right onto there to darken it up. So you can play around with how dark and light you want your image to be. You can see there how that just really darkened those up, and I'm going to stamp them a couple of times. Just re-inking that with the marker. Now I'm going to use a marker to add some shading and a little even more of a watercolor look to this stamping. You really can't do this wrong. One thing I love about this particular stamp is that you could use this for pretty much all the seasons except maybe winter. So in the fall you could color with beautiful oranges and reds onto these trees and make a lovely fall card. For springtime you could even add in some pinks in there, like some flowers on the trees. Now here I am wiping off those trunks because I'm going to mist this with water, and I didn't want the trunk to blend and bleed. I just wanted this top part of the trees to have that watercolor look. And you can see how stamping on that Bristol smooth paper, you get some of the detail. I love the way that the ink sort of puddles and pools up onto that paper. I added a little bit of lighter green at the top, and then I'm just misting that. And because my background that I painted wasn't too dark and it also complemented the image, you can see that I can stamp right over the top of it. I don't have to go back and sort of paint around what I've already stamped by doing the background first. Now this stamp also comes with the great sort of a ground line. So I stamped that down, and here I'm just picking up a brush with water and blended that out a little bit, and then I'm going to go ahead and dry this and move on to the next step. So the final step, it's just a 3-step process, is to add shadows or additional details like flowers or whatever you want to add to your scene. So you certainly could stop right where we left off, but it is fun sometimes to play around and add some additional shadows. And what I'm doing here is I just colored with my marker onto my stamp positioning tool, but you could use an acrylic block or a palette. And I'm just adding some additional shadowing under the trees. I started with a really light shadow there, and you could certainly stop there, but I wanted something a little bit more dynamic, a little bit bolder. So you will see here in a minute that I am going to go pretty bold with my shadow. So that's sort of the lighter version, and then here's where I just go crazy. I'm just going to color right on there with my marker and then go in and blend that using my paintbrush and just some water. And again, all of the colors and everything I've used are listed up on screen at the very end of the video, so you can just hit pause to check it out in more detail, but you certainly can do this with whatever type of water-based markers that you have on hand and that you already love working with. And that finishes the scene, just 3 simple steps. Now to finish off my card, I went ahead and stamped Penny Black's new sentiment stamp, Faith, Hope, and Love. This is a great sentiment set with lots of sentiments that are great for any time of year, just like this stamp. So I stamped that with Versamark ink and white heat embossed it down there at the bottom of the card, and the card is complete. And this is an A2 size card. So now we're going to make a second card, Scenic card, following these same 3 simple steps, and this uses our Pathway Cling Stamp 40-752. So again, step 1 is to just paint a simple background that complements the stamp. And with this stamp, it's a little bit more it's just a little different looking than the tree stamp. So what I wanted to do is just stamp this top part of this stamp lightly so I could see where the sky meets those trees in the background. So I went ahead and did that with a I believe it was Toffee Crunch ink, Memento ink, and now I'm going to just take my blue marker and paint my sky around that. So I don't have to worry about things overlapping. The colors will be true when I go back and actually stamp the image. It's just an easy way to know where to do your sky. So again, I'm using the Twi markers and I'm just coloring that down, and then I will go in and blend it with water. And the darker color will remain where I actually colored onto the paper, and it will get lighter as it moves up into the sky. This is the Bristol paper, the smooth Bristol cardstock again. Now, you wouldn't have to do this with markers. You could grab your favorite watercolors and do the exact same thing to create that scene. And so I'm just painting in that sky. I love with this particular color how you get lots of different shades of blue and even a little bit of sort of a purple color in there. Really beautiful for a sky. Now I don't want to add too much water on this Bristol cardstock. It isn't a watercolor paper, so I am careful not to add too much because I don't want it to curl up. And I did add just a little bit that extends below into that stamped area just so that I didn't leave any white spaces. Now I do want to dry this before I move on to step 2. So step 1 for creating a complementary background was just painting in the sky. So next for step 2, I'm actually going to just stamp the image. So I've kept it in my stamp positioning tool and I can stamp it and blend and restamp as desired. So here I'm going to color directly onto the stamp using my Twi markers, and I am just coloring all of this here with some green. Not the entire stamp, but just the areas at the top and towards that pathway. And then I am going to lightly mist this with water and stamp it down. And then I'm going to do some blending here with my paintbrush and just some water. So because I stamped that in a with a water-based marker, I can go in and blend that out. If I don't use too much water, I can still see some of the details that I stamped, and I can blend that even more just to give it an entire watercolor look, which matches up then with the sky that we've already painted. Now I am going to dry this before I move on to my next step. So what you can do, like especially for those trees over on the right hand side, I've stamped them, I've blended them out so it has that overall kind of green look. Then I can go back and restamp and capture more of the details in the stamped image. So I'm just cleaning off my stamp there, drying it as well. And here's where I can go in and just add some darker areas, some shading. I already have that sort of base of green that's blended on the stamp, and now I can just darken some of those up and capture more of the details. And you can start to see the depth of the stamped image really come to life. Now again, this is one of those stamps that is so great that you can really use this for any occasion. You could do this for fall, for spring. This makes a great masculine card, thinking of you, missing you. If someone, a graduation card even, headed off on a new path. I love stamps like this that are really versatile. And you can see here I've grabbed a darker green and I'm just coloring that onto the stamp and then stamping down, and I am not blending it with water so that I keep more of those details of the stamp there. I added some brown to add to some of those branches off in the background. Now I am going to blend a little bit here on that pathway in just a moment, and I'm going to dry this before I move on to step 3. So step 3 is just to add shadows or additional details like flowers. So certainly you could have stopped at step 2. It looks beautiful, but it is fun sometimes to take it even further. So I'm going to grab my markers again, and I'm going to add some additional shading here along this pathway. So I just colored with that marker and then I'm going to blend it out. Now you do want to be careful. What you have stamped is water-based, so it will blend as well if you get that paintbrush onto that. So I'm just being careful, but that's okay with me. I want this to sort of have that loose watercolor look throughout. So I added a couple of different colors here on this pathway. You can see how just adding that additional detail really adds a lot to the entire image. So simple to do. You could do it with the markers, or again, you could just do that with your favorite watercolors that you already have on hand. Now here is something that's fun. If you want to give this a springtime look, I'm just adding a little bit of pink with the marker to some of these grass blades down here in the foreground of this stamped image. And I added a couple of different colors of pink, and again the exact colors used will be listed up on screen at the end of the video, so you can just hit pause if you want to see those in more detail. And then I'm just going to take my paintbrush with just a little bit of water and very lightly dab on that to blend them and give them that watercolor look, and just give them that look of some flowers growing in the field. And I think this would make a really fun set of cards where you could do everything the same, but then add different colored flowers. These would look beautiful in blues and purples, yellows and reds. Just would be a fun way you can make a set of cards that are just a little bit different just by changing the color of the flowers. And that would make a great gift set to give to somebody as well. So to finish up this card, all that was left to do was, oh, I did add a little bit more detail here on these trees in the background. And then all that was left to do was to stamp my sentiment. And I have stamped this using our friendship sentiments. And I love this set. It's especially great right now when some of us can't all be together. They make great sentiments to send to someone you wish was a little bit closer, but you still feel really connected with. And so here is the finished card. I thank you so much for watching, and up here on screen are the supplies as promised. The first set of supplies here is for the card featuring our Arbor stamp. You can hit pause if you want to read them and need more time. And then the second set of supplies listed here is for the card featuring our Pathway stamp. Thanks for watching and happy stamping.